They say the United States and the United Kingdom are two nations divided by a common language. On paper, it's a neat little phrase about spelling differences and slang. But in reality, that divide runs deeper, woven through history, culture, values, and even the way people think about life itself. If you ask an American what they think of the British, you might get a mix of admiration, amusement, and a little bit of confusion. They might talk about the accent, how it makes everything sound smarter, even when you're just reading a menu. They might mention the royal family, cups of tea, or an almost magical politeness that feels charming and mysterious. And if they've visited London, they might throw in something about double-decker buses, rainy days, and a pub on every corner. Ask a Brit what they think of Americans and the picture shifts. They might praise Americans' friendliness, their optimism, and the way they seem genuinely excited about life. But they might also raise an eyebrow at the volume, the portion sizes, or what they see as an unshakable belief that bigger is always better. There's often admiration for American ambition, but also a sense that it can sometimes tip into excess. Beneath the jokes and the cliches lies something more interesting. Both countries hold a mirror up to the other. Americans sometimes see in the British a kind of groundedness, tradition, and subtlety they wish they had more of. The British sometimes see in Americans a boldness, openness, and willingness to dream big that feels refreshing, even if it's not their natural style. Of course, neither view is entirely accurate. These are snapshots shaped by films, TV shows, news headlines, and the occasional holiday abroad. They're colored by history too, from allies in war to rivals in sport, from colonial ties to cultural exports that have crossed oceans. And yet these perceptions matter. They shape how we talk to each other, how we do business together, how we form friendships, and how we navigate the unspoken rules of politeness, humor, and personal space. In this video, we're going to explore 10 of the most common ways Americans and Brits see each other, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with puzzlement, sometimes with a bit of both. We'll go beyond the surface, digging into why these ideas exist, what truths they might hold, and where they fall apart. Along the way, you might recognize yourself, challenge your own assumptions, and perhaps see the other side in a slightly different light. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about stereotypes. It's about understanding how two cultures, separated by an ocean, can look at each other with curiosity, affection, and just enough gentle teasing to keep things interesting. 1. The accent effect. Why everything sounds smarter or funnier. If there's one thing that stands out in almost every conversation between Americans and Brits, it's the accent. For Americans, hearing a British accent, whether it's the crisp tones of received pronunciation or the softer lilt of regional speech, can instantly elevate whatever's being said. A simple grocery list read in a posh London voice suddenly feels like poetry. Even casual banter sounds intelligent, sophisticated, and to some, irresistibly charming. This fascination is partly about novelty. In the US, British accents are far less common, so they stand out. But it's also about cultural associations. For decades, Hollywood has cast British actors as professors, villains, royalty, or wise mentors. The result? Many Americans subconsciously link the accent with intelligence, authority, and refinement. Of course, Brits don't always see it that way. Within the UK, accents carry strong regional and class connotations. A refined Southern accent might be admired by some, but seen as overly formal, or even pretentious by others. And a thick regional accent like Scouse or Geordie might feel warm and familiar to a Brit, but can be
Not
baffling to an American
hot,
who's never heard it
hot.
before. The reverse is true too. To many Brits, the American accent, especially the friendly, open tones often heard in the media, can sound approachable and upbeat. It carries a kind of enthusiasm that feels genuine and inviting, but it can also be a source of gentle ribbing. A strong Southern drawl or rapid-fire New York speech might be imitated with a mix of affection and exaggeration, just as Americans sometimes do with British accents. This mutual fascination with how the other speaks says something deeper about cultural perception. For Americans, the British accent often symbolizes tradition, history, and a slower, more deliberate way of speaking. For Brits, the American accent often represents energy, warmth, and a can-do spirit. In both cases, the accent becomes a kind of shorthand for cultural traits. Sometimes accurate, sometimes just a well-worn story we like to tell ourselves. And here's the funny thing. Spend enough time with someone from the other side, and the novelty fades. You start to hear the person, not the accent. But until that happens, the way we speak remains one of the most immediate and enduring impressions we leave on each other, whether it makes us sound wiser, friendlier, or simply a bit more exotic. 2. If you've ever watched an American and a Brit meet for the first time, you'll notice something interesting. Both will leave the conversation thinking the other was perfectly nice, but for very different reasons. In the UK, politeness is often about subtlety. It's about not imposing, keeping things understated, and avoiding making someone uncomfortable. The British sorry is legendary, not always an admission of fault, but a small social lubricant that smooths over awkward moments. Standing in a queue without complaining, holding back strong opinions until you know your audience, adding a bit or perhaps to soften a statement. These are quiet ways of showing respect. In the US, friendliness is often about openness. Americans tend to be quicker to smile, make eye contact, and strike up casual conversation with strangers. They might compliment your outfit, ask about your day, or tell you their life story within minutes of meeting you. For them, this warmth is a form of politeness. It says, I see you, I welcome you, I'm interested. Here's where the wires can cross. To some Americans, British politeness can seem distant or even frosty. They might mistake a reserved manner for disinterest. To some Brits, American friendliness can feel a little too much, too soon, like being hugged before you've even exchanged names. Neither is wrong. They're simply different dialects of kindness. British politeness tends to protect personal space and emotional boundaries, while American friendliness often aims to break them down quickly in the name of connection. Each style has its strengths. The British way can feel safe and respectful. The American way can feel warm and inclusive. Interestingly, when the two styles meet in the middle, the results can be delightful. Americans often find that beneath the British reserve lies a dry wit and loyalty that deepens over time. Brits often discover that American friendliness isn't shallow. It's just a cultural habit of starting relationships with enthusiasm rather than caution. Ultimately, both cultures value decency and respect. They just package it differently. The trick is realizing that when someone from across the Atlantic acts nice in their way, they're not trying to confuse you. They're just speaking their version of the same language. 3. Humor, wit, sarcasm, and the risk of being misunderstood. If language is a bridge between cultures, humor is the rickety plank in the middle where people sometimes stumble. Americans and Brits both love to laugh, but what they find funny and how they deliver it can feel like entirely different worlds. In Britain, humor often lives in the shadows. It's dry, understated, and delivered with a straight face. Sarcasm isn't just a comedic tool, it's part of everyday conversation. A Brit might make a cutting remark, completely deadpan, and expect you to pick up on the subtle irony. Self-deprecation is another hallmark. Making yourself the butt of the joke is almost a national pastime. It's not about showing weakness. It's about showing you don't take yourself too seriously. In America, humor tends to be more direct and expressive. Punchlines are clearer, timing is sharper, and storytelling plays a bigger role. American comedy often leans into exaggeration, physicality, and optimism. There's a rhythm to it that keeps the energy high. While sarcasm exists, it's usually more obvious with tone and body language signaling the joke to make sure it lands. When these two styles meet, misunderstandings can bloom. An American might miss the joke in a British comment entirely, thinking it was a genuine statement. A Brit might hear an American joke and think it's trying too hard or lacks the delicious bite of subtle irony. And self-deprecation? To some Americans, it can sound like genuine insecurity, while to Brits, it's a friendly icebreaker. But here's the magic. Once you learn each other's comedic code, the humor often deepens. Americans start to relish the slow burn of British wit, the kind that lands a few seconds later and makes you chuckle out of nowhere. Brits begin to appreciate the unabashed joy of American humor, where you can laugh out loud without worrying whether it's too much. Humor at its best becomes a bridge, not a barrier. And when an American and a Brit can laugh together, fully understanding the joke and the intent behind it, the cultural gap between them narrows in an instant. 4. Work ethic and ambition, how each side defines success. Both Americans and Brits value hard work, but they often frame it in very different ways, and those differences can lead to subtle misunderstandings about what ambition really means. In US, ambition is worn proudly. Success is something to be chased openly, and there's no shame in saying you want more. More responsibility, more recognition, more income. The American dream is built on the idea that anyone, regardless of where they start, can climb as high as their talent and determination will take them. Long hours are often seen as a sign of commitment, and self-promotion isn't just accepted, it's expected. In many workplaces, if you don't talk about your achievements, you risk being overlooked. In the UK, ambition is often a quieter affair. There's pride in doing well, but it's balanced by a cultural tendency to downplay your own accomplishments. The British ideal often leans toward competence without showmanship, progress without bragging. Long hours might be tolerated, but they're not necessarily celebrated, and work-life balance is generally seen as an important marker of success. Ambition is there, it's just more understated, often wrapped in a layer of self-deprecating humor. When these attitudes meet, they can cause a bit of friction. To some Americans, British modesty can look like a lack of drive. To some Brits, American self-confidence can come across as arrogance. But the truth is, both approaches have their strengths. The American openness about ambition can be inspiring, encouraging people to dream bigger and take bold risks. The British emphasis on humility can foster a grounded perspective and prevent the burnout that comes from always chasing the next milestone. Interestingly, these differences sometimes melt away when working toward a shared goal. Americans can adopt the British knack for steady, reliable progress, while Brits can tap into the American willingness to think big and push boundaries. Together, they can form a powerful combination, the boldness to aim high and the patience to get there without burning out. 5. Food culture. From tea and toast to supersized shakes. If you want to see the cultural differences between Americans and Brits play out in real time, just sit them down at each other's breakfast tables. The contrast is immediate and often hilarious. In the UK, food culture leans toward comfort, tradition, and a kind of understated practicality. Breakfast might be tea and toast, or on a weekend, the full English: eggs, bacon, sausages, beans, mushrooms, and tomatoes, arranged in a way that feels both hearty and familiar. Portions are filling but modest, and the focus is less on flashiness and more on satisfaction. Tea is more than just a drink. It's a cultural anchor, the go-to solution for everything from bad news to awkward silences. In the US, food culture often feels like an open invitation to abundance. Breakfast can mean fluffy pancakes stacked high, waffles dripping with syrup, or omelets the size of a dinner plate. Coffee is king, and not just a small mug. Venti cups, bottomless refills, and a culture of grabbing one to go. American portions are famously larger, and there's often an emphasis on choice. Endless menu variations, customizable toppings, and mix and match options. These differences extend beyond the breakfast table. British food traditions lean heavily on regional classics: pies, roasts, curries, fish, and chips, with a growing appreciation for global flavors thanks to immigration and travel. American food culture, while also rooted in tradition, thrives on reinvention and fusion, blending cuisines, scaling up portions, and adding an extra layer of indulgence. Sometimes the differences spark lighthearted teasing. Brits might raise an eyebrow at supersized sodas or deep-fried everything. Americans might wonder why British sandwiches sometimes come with so little filling, or why ice in drinks is almost an afterthought. But behind the jokes lies something deeper. Each culture's food reflects its broader values. For Brits, food often reflects community and routine, shared rituals that bring comfort and predictability. For Americans, it reflects possibility and variety, the idea that you can have exactly what you want, however you want it. Both approaches have their charms, and for travelers, part of the fun is stepping into the other's world, whether that means trying sweet tea in the South or sampling a Cornish pasty by the sea. 6. Health, lifestyle, and the pace of life. When Americans and Brits talk about lifestyle, they often discover that while their values overlap, their daily rhythms can feel very different. It's not just about how fast life moves. It's about what each culture sees as normal when it comes to health and how we spend our time. In the UK, there's a certain steadiness to the pace of life. Workdays can still be busy, but there's often more emphasis on preserving personal time, especially evenings and weekends. Paid holidays are more generous by law, and using them is expected, not seen as a sign of laziness. Walking is a bigger part of everyday life, partly because towns and cities are more compact, and public transport is more accessible. This slower, more walkable rhythm can create a lifestyle that feels balanced, even if it's not always stress-free. In the US, life often feels more on the go. Work culture can mean longer hours, fewer holidays, and a faster turnaround between waking up and diving into productivity. Driving is the norm in many places, not just for commuting, but for nearly every errand. The pace can be energizing, it encourages ambition and action, but it can also make it harder to slow down. Health systems shape daily choices too. In the UK, the NHS provides free at point of use healthcare, which means medical costs are less likely to dictate lifestyle decisions. In the US, healthcare is often tied to employment, and medical bills can influence everything from career choices to financial planning. This difference can subtly affect how people view risk, stress, and even the role of work in their lives. Fitness culture also plays out differently. Americans often embrace more structured exercise, gyms, classes, sports leagues, while in the UK, staying active is often woven more casually into daily routines, like walking to the shop or cycling to work. Of course, both countries have their couch potatoes and fitness fanatics, but the cultural default is shaped by environment and infrastructure. When an American visits the UK, they might feel the slower pace as a kind of relief, time to breathe, walk, and savor. When a Brit visits the US, they might feel the energy and ambition like a spark, an invitation to move faster, dream bigger, and try more. Both rhythms have their strengths. The key is knowing when to match the pace and when to step outside it. 7. National pride, quiet confidence versus loud celebration. National pride exists in both the UK and the US, but the way it's expressed could hardly be more different. It's not that one country has more pride than the other, it's that the cultural rules for showing it are worlds apart. In the US, patriotism is often open, visible, and woven into daily life. You see it in the flags outside homes, the singing of the national anthem before sports games, and the way people talk about the land of the free with heartfelt conviction. For many Americans, celebrating their country isn't about ignoring its flaws. It's about recognizing its ideals and the possibilities it offers. Expressing pride is seen as a unifying act, something that connects people across political or cultural divides. In the UK, national pride tends to be quieter and more understated. You might see flags flown for special events, royal celebrations, international football tournaments, but they're less common in day-to-day life. Pride often comes out in moments of shared experience, a gold medal at the Olympics, a victory at Wimbledon, or even a well-executed self-deprecating joke about the weather. The British relationship with patriotism is more reserved, partly because overt displays can feel uncomfortably close to nationalism, which carries a more complicated history in Europe. This difference can lead to mutual misunderstandings. Americans might mistake British understatement for a lack of pride. Brits might see American patriotism as over the top or naive. But when you look closer, both countries carry deep affection for their identity. It's just filtered through different cultural lenses. In the US, pride is often about possibility and the belief in self-made success. In the UK, pride is often about heritage, resilience, and the ability to face challenges with quiet determination. Both forms can inspire, but they appeal to different instincts. One to dream loudly, the other to carry on steadily. Interestingly, when major global events occur, the differences can blur. Brits can be just as openly emotional as Americans when the moment calls for it, and Americans can show the same wry humor and grounded realism that Brits are known for. It's a reminder that under the style of expression, the sentiment is often the same. 8. History and memory, long shadows versus new horizons. One of the clearest contrasts between the US and the UK is how each nation relates to its history. It's not just about the number of centuries behind them, it's about the weight that history carries in everyday life. In the UK, history is everywhere. You can walk down a street in a small town and see buildings older than the United States itself. Place names, traditions, and institutions stretch back hundreds of years. The monarchy, for all its debates and controversies, serves as a living link to that past. This deep historical presence shapes how Brits think about change. There's often an instinct to preserve, to respect what's lasted, and to move forward in measured steps rather than giant leaps. In the US, history feels closer to the surface, not because it's less important, but because the country is younger. The American story is one of reinvention, of breaking away from the past to build something new. Many Americans take pride in the idea that their country is still a young nation, with the freedom to redefine itself for each generation. This can foster a sense of optimism and possibility, but it can also mean that traditions are more flexible and sometimes more disposable. These differences can color perceptions. To Americans, the UK's reverence for history can feel like resistance to change, even when change might be needed. To Brits, the American willingness to overhaul systems and start fresh can seem impulsive, even reckless. But both perspectives come from the same desire, to create a future worth living in. And there's another layer. The UK's long history includes periods of empire, colonization, and global dominance. Chapters that carry both pride and pain. The US's history includes its own contradictions, ideals of freedom alongside histories of slavery and displacement. How each country talks about these chapters varies, but they both grapple with the tension between celebrating achievements and reckoning with mistakes. Perhaps that's why when Americans and Brits talk about history, they sometimes talk past each other. One side leans on continuity, the other on reinvention, but when they listen closely, they find that both are really asking the same question. How do we honor where we've come from while still moving towards something better? 9. Media, pop culture, and the stories we tell about each other. Much of what Americans and Brits believe about each other comes not from personal experience, but from movies, TV shows, music, and the news. The result? A picture that's vivid, entertaining, and often wildly incomplete. In the US, British culture is frequently filtered through the lens of charm, wit, and elegance. Hollywood has long cast British actors as either sophisticated heroes or brilliantly articulate villains. Period dramas from Downton Abbey to The Crown paint a world of grand estates, crisp uniforms, and polite scandal. Even modern British exports like Sherlock, Doctor Who, or The Great British Bake Off carry a certain refined, quirky flavor that many Americans find irresistible. This creates a perception that the UK is a place of endless tradition, clever humor, and impeccable manners, even if the reality is more complex. In the UK, American culture often comes across as larger than life. From blockbuster films to chart-topping music, the US exports a sense of scale. Bigger stories, bigger emotions, bigger explosions. American TV shows portray high school as a whirlwind of prom dances, football games, and cheerleaders. New York and Los Angeles dominate the backdrop, with small-town America painted in warm, nostalgic tones. But British audiences also see the extremes. Headlines about political polarization, gun violence, or celebrity scandals, which can feed stereotypes about chaos and excess. The truth, of course, is more nuanced. British culture has as much grit as grace, and American culture has as much subtlety as spectacle. But pop culture thrives on emphasis, on turning the volume up on certain traits until they become defining characteristics in the public imagination. This is why when Brits and Americans meet in real life, there's often a delightful moment of surprise. The American might discover that not every Brit lives in a charming cottage and quotes Shakespeare. The Brit might find that not every American drives a pickup truck and eats dinner from a drive-thru. These moments, when reality steps in and reshapes the story, can lead to deeper understanding than any TV show could offer. Still, media has a powerful influence. The more diverse the stories we see from each other's countries, the harder it becomes to cling to easy stereotypes. And perhaps that's the greatest gift pop culture can offer. Not just entertainment, but the chance to meet each other in all our complexity, one story at a time. 10. Shared values beneath the differences. When you peel back the accents, the customs, and the cultural quirks, something remarkable becomes clear. Americans and Brits often care about the same core things. The way they express those values might look different, but the roots run in the same direction. Both cultures value fairness, even if they define it differently. In the US, fairness often means equal opportunity, the belief that everyone should have the chance to succeed if they work hard enough. In the UK, fairness can lean more toward equal outcomes, ensuring that the playing field is level and that no one is left too far behind. The emphasis shifts, but the moral instinct is the same. A society works best when it treats its people justly. Family and community matter deeply on both sides of the Atlantic. Americans might talk more about individual achievement, but that achievement is often driven by a desire to provide for loved ones and give them a better life. Brits might focus more on shared responsibility, but that sense of duty still comes from caring for the people around them. Both cultures take pride in helping their neighbors, supporting friends, and finding belonging in a group. There's also a shared resilience, a stubborn refusal to give up when things get tough. In the US, that resilience often shows up as optimism, a belief that better days are ahead if you just keep pushing. In UK, it's more about stoicism, the quiet endurance summed up in phrases like keep calm and carry on. Different tones, same underlying strength. And perhaps most importantly, both nations share a curiosity about each other and the wider world. They trade ideas, music, fashion, technology, and humor with a kind of playful rivalry. They critique each other, tease each other, and sometimes misunderstand each other. But beneath it all is a genuine fascination that keeps the conversation going. This is what makes the cultural relationship between the UK and the US so enduring. It's not built on perfect alignment, but on a mixture of familiarity and difference. The differences keep things interesting. The shared values make connection possible. And when you realize that, the question of what do Americans and Brits think about each other becomes less about stereotypes and more about an ongoing, evolving friendship, one that will probably keep trading jokes, swapping traditions, and learning from each other for generations to come. When you step back from the details, the accents, the humor, the food, the pace of life, it becomes clear that the story of Americans and Brits is not one of opposites, but of two branches growing from the same tree. They've weathered storms together, disagreed loudly, teased endlessly, and yet, time and again, found common ground when it matters most. Yes, the cultural quirks are real. Americans can seem bold where Brits are reserved, enthusiastic where Brits are understated. Brits can appear cautious where Americans are daring, measured where Americans are impulsive. But these differences are surface patterns, shaped by history, geography, and habit. Underneath, the foundations are remarkably similar. A belief in fairness, a desire for connection, a sense of humor that thrives even in hard times, and a willingness to adapt when the world demands it. The fascination each side has for the other is, in a way, proof of this bond. You don't stay curious about something for hundreds of years unless it matters to you. The US and the UK share more than language. They share a cultural DNA that, while expressed differently, still recognizes itself in the mirror. Perhaps that's why when an American and a Brit meet in person, so many stereotypes quietly dissolve. The imagined version from movies or headlines is replaced by a living, breathing person who is both familiar and surprising. You notice not just the differences, but the ways they laugh at the same things you do, care about the same struggles, and dream about the same possibilities. In the end, what Americans and Brits think about each other may be less important than what they learn from each other. Each has strengths the other can admire, blind spots the other can illuminate, and stories the other can enrich. The beauty lies not in proving who's right, but in recognizing that both bring something worth keeping to the shared table. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Two nations divided by an ocean, united by more than they realize, and still, after all this time, interested enough to keep talking. And in a world that moves fast and forgets easily, that's something rare, something worth holding on to.